happened in my lifetime, and I know a lot of the experiences. I remember when I was a youngster, we had the local daily newspaper who lived in the town big enough to have daily newspaper. Now, my mom got the weekly newspaper from her hometown in Leroy, Kansas, a town of about 500. And she would read it like a letter from home every week, no matter where we were stationed, we were military brats. And maybe 2 TV stations, local TV stations that were affiliates of big networks. So when you think about it, we didn't have a lot of news choices. And it seemed like plenty, we didn't have really better than all the ones we had. It seemed like we had quite an array of news. But if you think about that, and compare that to all the different news sources we have today, it's just an amazing change. Nobody's seen more change than the River Press in Montana, from 1880 till today. You're on Facebook, you're on the electronic digital copies that I saw. I was looking at all that kind of stuff, so you've gone a long way in making it to what's happening today. And that paper has seen lots of different changes over the years. The changes in ownership, changes in factions of ownership, changes in how it was put together, and changes over its influence and its circulation. I did a book in 2005 called Copper Course. And it was about newspapers in Montana under the Anaconda. And we owned most of the major daily newspapers in the state. It didn't own a lot of weeklies, but it had still great influence. You owned the dailies because they, in terms of circulation, it had 2/3 of the circulation of Montana newspaper readers at the time. So it was a study on sort of how news worked in that kind of environment, how it changed in 1959 when they sold their papers to businessmen in a group called the newspapers. Still hold those newspapers today, but there's so many others today. There are 80 newspapers in Montana Newspaper Association. When I was on the board for 10 years, there were 88. I think at the high point, so Montana still has a lot of newspapers, and I think I think the reason for that is because we are so spread out. And newspapers allow us to sort of reach our communities in easier sort of ways. There's a demographic advantage to newspapers too. If you grew up with newspapers, Montana has an older than average demography, and people were used to reading newspapers. They like that tactile feel of the newspaper in their hand. I love it to this day. Except when it lands in the snowbank or in the porch or on the roof. You know, I love that kind of thing to do too, but so those are changes that people sort of seeing right now too. My daily news habit, because I'm in the business, because I talk about it all the time, I feel like I have to keep up with the news constantly. I spend an hour or more every morning reading the news from all sorts of different sources. I don't watch nearly as much TV as I used to, for news anyway, because it would come on at certain times when I was busy with other things. The kids call it appointment time. You have to be there at a certain time, or they stream it on demand on their computers for they don't even read the news update and see a tactile newspaper or watch an appointment television show in years. And that's the way life has become. They're native to those kind of technologies, and they spend a lot of time with that. So the people I'm talking to spend all sorts of different age groups, all sorts of experience levels with different kinds of news and how they receive it today. But that's what I really want to talk about, some of those changes and how it kind of got started, where we started. And I love this picture. I was looking at some information about Fort Benton, and I saw Ken Robinson's blog piece. I think it was 2011. Must have been like the 130th anniversary of the River Press. About that time he wrote something about that. And this is one of the pictures I saw from that. And I thought, you know, what did those people need to know about news? This is before probably the newspaper existed. And the picture is showing this kind of scene. You would wait for how many weeks for a newspaper from the States to arrive in Fort Benton? It could be weeks, it could be months, it could get lost, it could never arrive. Boats sank, all sorts of things happened along the way. So just this idea of communication being as regular and as steady and as punctual as it is today, by the second, by the minute, is so totally foreign to people at that particular time, but there still was a craving to know what was going on outside of the places we could see. And most anthropologists, if you'll talk to them, they will tell you that this is something they find in culture after culture after culture. There's a wicked, it's called the awareness instinct. People want it. They want to know what's happening over the ridge. They want to know what's happening around the bend in the river. They want to know what happened down the block. That sort of instinct is good for us in a lot of ways. It's how we keep our bearings and situations, how we know where we stand in communities. It's how we know where we fit in terms of states. So that awareness of each other is really important. And that newspaper that you have in front of you is a real integral part. It's one place where people can gather in this community over something where they can share lots of common ground. And I think local news is so important. I spent most of my career working in local news, not so much national news, and some not so much international news at all, but the local kinds of papers. And I know that that's the glue of most communities that I've been in. And I was looking through the River Press, the last two issues, and still have to prove that this club, this young adults event, this library board meetings, all sorts of things that were covered in that paper that were about the things that you guys do as volunteers in this community. I knew this as a volunteer town before I met you, because I could tell by all the different ways that this information came into the picture. And I also knew that the editor worked her tail off. Because it's a lifestyle, constantly trying to keep up with people that are giving you news and finding out things and making sure that gets into the paper in a way that's correct. And there's something about a weekly newspaper owner. I will tell you, I worked as an editor of a weekly newspaper in City, Montana, twice weekly, twice a week. In the middle of the oil boom, so it was kind of like Port Benton at the time, and Port Benton in the 1880s, maybe, there was all sorts of money and investment coming in. But I learned that really the job of a weekly newspaper was to make sure you got the official version of what was going on that everybody already So that was kind of the way I felt as I was doing the paper. I had to make sure we got it right. And we weren't, the crazy rumor wasn't really, we could verify that, we could check that, we could talk to people, we could see if that was very true. So before we wrote the official version, we would take a look at that kind of stuff. But I would also make a point that news was rare. And it didn't happen very much. And the fact that it was rare gave it kind of authority. That it probably doesn't have. It was rare. You don't have very many sources. You tended to believe it. What other choices you have? You do have other places to go. So today that's a challenge change. You have a source on just about everything. And it's mixed with verified information, and disinformation, and rumors, and all sorts of stuff that can be reported today at the speed of light. It used to be in most major newspaper journalism compositions, you verified information. That was the standard of the discipline. And then you didn't publish it until you could verify that stuff. Today's speed, you see so much stuff being disseminated in posts before anybody's even checked to see whether it's true. And then there's a big argument about whether it's true for like a sleep or so, and you left kind of wondering what the hell's going on. And so I think that you see that kind of all the time. That's why your test is so important, that when we have time, that people who ask questions say, what's going on here? What is this? A little stuff about Montana newspapers. It's the Montana Post, 1864, the first sort of regular newspaper we had in the state. By the 1860s, they were delivered on by the railroads. Or the 1880s, you put your newspapers on a train and take them all over the state. You could spread your words so much farther. And this is a cartoon from a New York newspaper in the day about what it was like to have your train stop at a local place. They'd bring the papers on. Every little stop, the news parties would come on and give you papers and sell you papers. And riding a train, people looked like this is the joke. You couldn't get away from the fact there was news everywhere. Thanks to this technology called the railroad. It was able to bring you more information than you've ever had before, more voices that you ever had before. So some of those changes were happening. Technology's always made a big difference in the way information and news travels. The first newspapers in America relied literally on correspondence, letters from people from afar, to tell them what was going on. And I don't know how you could know for sure that they knew what for sure what they're writing about, because they're a long way, and there might be from across the ocean to tell you what was going on. So that correspondence, it was hard to sort of verify a lot of that stuff. It wasn't until the Civil War, when Americans were at a war in such great numbers, 750,000 Americans died in that war, which sounds like a lot of people, and for a population much smaller then than it is now, it was a huge proportion of the population. But people wanted to know about that. They wanted to know lists of people who were wounded and casualties in battles. They wanted to know what next move was going to be. They wanted to know what was going to happen in the war that was happening in their own country. And so newspapers became terribly, and the newspaper reporters suddenly became terribly important. Before then you had correspondents, then you had reporters, people who were in the field trying to get information and sending it to. They invented the newspaper interview, where they talked to people who were there at the scene. They described what they saw at battles. They ran to guard steamships, went to telegraph offices, and transported their information directly to news outlets all over the country. So just the technology of the telegraph, the steamship, all that kind of stuff, and the situation made information travel so much farther. This is Joseph Pulitzer there on the left. This is at a time when they knew that they could create, if they could sell lots of newspapers, get lots of subscribers, they could sell their attention to advertisers. And Pulitzer is one of the first publishers in the country to won over 1 million circulation. And if you can imagine that at that time, it was just, his rival, William Randolph Hearst, did the same thing. And they had this incredible rivalry for people's eyeballs, but also so the developing importance of advertising, right? So thank goodness for advertising. It's that important because it serves a reflection of how much influence that publication could have, how many people it could reach. Because if it didn't get a hold of a lot of people, it couldn't sell any ads because you didn't know what was going to happen. I was reading Ken Robeson's piece on the River Press. He talked about one of the reporters went out one day in a buggy or a buckboard looking for subscribers. And he talks about, he said, I saw some prairie dog towns. I went through some scattered camps of people. He says, I don't think I could find a subscriber out of the entire bunch. So they were rare tens teeth trying to get people, and the people at that time in these boom and bust situations were kind of transient. They weren't there for very long. They get up and they move. So how'd you like to be a newspaper publisher trying to serve an audience that was constantly sort of shifting? That's kind of what's happening today in a lot of ways, online in an individual sense. That idea that you've got to keep them, because if you can't get subscribers, you're going to have a hard time getting advertisers, which is what really paid for the publications. When newspapers first started, subscribers paid for the most of the costs. Most of the printer publishers were printers by trade. Some of them weren't even editors. They would hire people to write or do this kind of work. But they were trying to find some other space for to use their presses that were running for bills and handboards and ballots and all this other kinds of stuff. Little bits of news, and then people wanted to buy ads so that they could reach all those people that were subscribing. And eventually it came to the point where if you could sell your paper for a penny, you could get lots of subscribers. If you could get lots of subscribers, you could get lots of advertisers. And that created a real boom in circulation and advertising. And it got to the point where people didn't pay very little for news. And that's kind of the way it stayed for an awful long time. It didn't cost very much to get the news. It didn't really cost it didn't really reflect the cost that went into it in a lot of ways. It didn't talk about that. It didn't cover man-hours. It didn't cover all those things. Advertising covered that. And one of the stories I'm telling you today is the news has always been subsidized. It always has been, in some way or another. First, it started out by subscribers subsidized the news in their communities. But then advertisers began to take a big share and have more influence in newspapers as a result of it. There was a time when government, The second newspaper in the American colonies back then was a paper called the Boston Newsletter. And it had, it just printed publications from government and nobody read it. And it failed. The first paper failed because it was carrying stuff from some guy who had a correspondent from England and was making fun of the crown, the king. And so the crown quashed that newspaper. So the influence on news and publication has always been quite sort of extreme, but it also had a great deal to do with how they were subsidized and how they were floated. So I would argue that Americans have really not known what it takes to, or the cost of news, what those costs really are. They've always got it pretty cheaply because advertising sort of subsidized that. So now we kind of feel that all information ought to be free. Right? I felt that most of my career. I didn't have to spend much for it. Now we're starting to see exactly what advertising costs, or what publications cost, what journalism costs, how much you have to, what it takes. And you'll find in the newspapers that are news outlets, digital outlets, they're hiring reporters, hiring journalists, hiring editors to get and find information. They're having a hard time covering their costs because the value of advertising actually has shrunk in the digital age. If you were a newspaper, you made money by subscriptions, a small part. You got advertisers coming, and then you built their ads for you. You could charge them for the cost of building an ad. It's like I'm building a house, I'm mowing your lawn. It's a service you do. I'm putting your ad together, and then I'll rent you space for that ad in my publication. So newspapers advertising, local advertising, display advertising, which you can kind of see, was fairly important and fairly lucrative kind of business. So when digital platforms took over, they started doing these ads, in which case didn't take very long to build. If you build it, you could reproduce it 1,000 times in a second, 1,000,000 times in a second. It became very cheap to make advertise and to put it on. And if you have social media platforms that can tell from your habits what you like, what you buy, what you read, what you do, and that's what Facebook does. Their surveillance information systems. They watch you so closely that they can target their audience. They know what you like, they know what makes you mad, they know what you like, what kind of clothing you like, they know what you purchased before, so they can target you as a shopper much better than display and advertising could, because that was a guess that people in this community, a percentage of them might like that. But now it's so much more personal, and I can get it to you in 3 days on Amazon. You know, so it has changed the game completely for news and how it's funded and how it works. And news that's trying to serve their communities, they're having a difficult time doing this. They're having to roll with punches, they have to come up with new strategies to make things happen. We'll talk about some of those here in just a minute. I wasn't around when FDR was president. My students wouldn't believe that, but they think I probably was. But I hear these radio fireside chats. I'm talking to the whole nation, but that was striking. Modern system. When did you hear a president talking to everybody in the country on the radio? People would gather around in the depths of the depression. He would say, "You don't want this." You know, he was very sort of hopeful and optimistic about what was going on there. But that was when you saw radio come. So there's a new technology that's going to change everything. And when you saw radio coming in, the big radio network established, we saw a lot of these big competing newspapers start to consolidate. In New York, there was a time when there were 11 dailies. In Chicago, there was as many, if not more, daily newspapers. Or then there were 2 dailies for a while. But when you started to see competition from other sorts of mediums, it made more sense to consolidate. We don't need 2 papers, we can't afford 2 papers, we can't afford 11, we can't afford 12. We're going to see what we can do to consolidate. And that would happen. It would happen in broadcasting. You would have the CBS network, NBC had a blue network, and then it was a red one, it had the 2 different networks, and then mutual broadcasting service. Some of you might remember some of these, but they were gone. Walter Cronkite, when I was a kid, it was Walter Cronkite. CBS News, Walter Cronkite. And Walter Cronkite had a reputation for having the voice of God. You know, talking about have not a lot of us choices. Well, when you heard Walter Cronkite, and he said, and that's the way it is. That's the voice of authority. Listen to me, trust me, that's the way it is. I'm not sure it always was, but who's gonna argue? Who had Walter Cronkite's seat? Nobody had Walter Cronkite's seat. So today it's so much different. And what moves at the slowest case now moves at the speed of light, and it's average. So the question for most of you as news consumers is, what do I consume? How do I consume? How do I trust? How do I know whether there's something that's valuable? And I think that's going to require more effort now than it ever has. And if you really want to pay attention and be educated, you're going to probably have to read an awful lot. You're going to have to pay attention to an awful lot. You're going to have to triangulate. You can't just trust one source now. We know that there were other people that had sources and stories that needed to be verified. You've all heard the story about the 10 blind men describing the elephant, you know, all coming up with different ideas of what it looked like. Well, it can seem that way when you're watching the news sometimes. And so how do you know who's going to have, who are you going to pay that's going to open their eyes and look at things? Who are you going to pay to verify information and that kind of stuff? Looking for people who do that and trusting people who verify is really one of the most important things I think people need to know about media today. This is a cartoon that ran in an American newspaper. It shows it symbolizes the meeting of the transoceanic telegraph cable. There's Britain and there's the United States are shaking hands over this underwater cable. Finally, connection can send a telegram to London from New York, and people were just a huge technological change. But there were some figures saying this information is moving too fast for human understanding. We can't deal with it. It's happening so fast. We can't even think about the implications and the consequences of all this information that is happening so fast. That seems so quaint. That seems so old fashioned. It seems so tiny now compared to the blizzard and stuff and the bits and bytes that come flashing in front of your screens that it tells you. But what it has said that we're not just having news that just says one person talks to many. Joseph Pulitzer talks to the many people in New York, or half of New York. We ran off first talking to their half, or Walter Cronkite talking to 60% of them, okay, on CBS. Now we have multiple people that talk to multiple people, and multiple conversations can go on all the time. That's a radical change. That's the most revolutionary change in information in my lifetime, or in the lifetime of the information. Because now we have all these competing sort of versions of events and dialogue. Any one of you who has a phone today, I have mine here somewhere. I can create an act of journalism in a second. Now, whether it's going to be journalism or not probably depends on some other variables. Is it true? Can I show my sources? Can I repeat this information? Are my sources trustworthy? Did I get it from people who actually know what's going on, or do I get it from people who are guessing? People who are speculating? People who are passing on a rumor, or secondhand kind of information? They're doing what your kids do. You know that's a problem, and yet it exists today. But everybody can do some journalism to some extent, and we rely on it. And that's if there's a good aspect of this. I like Wikipedia. You ever use Wikipedia? I give my $2 every other month, and I feel guilty because it should be more. But I subscribe to so many resources, I don't know how much more I can do there. And I like it because they give me synopsis, and it's constantly being edited by ordinary people, academics, and all sorts of stuff. And I tell my students, reporting students, I said, I don't want to ever see you quote Wikipedia in a story. Okay, that's called truthiness. It's in the process of being verified. And other people are handling this kind of information. But what's nice about it is those things at the bottom, that little tiny those footnotes that tells you, why did you find this? Why did you get this information? Who said that? How do they know? These are the questions that you first had as a kid. Why? What does it mean? How do they know? All good questions, and Wikipedia answers those kind of things. And when citizens are in a spot where nobody else can get to, and they send a verified piece of footage from their phone, it can change the whole country. Today does. It can shine a light on events that you can't see, or it can show you just one slice of the events, or one part of an argument, or some other part. So it's really helpful to have bring all sorts of different things together before you can kind of make the judgment of what really happened. And sometimes judgment, discernment, verification takes time, and that is not at a high value. Speed is what's important. And the algorithm is what's important. We're talking about social media. You know what the algorithm is? It's that surveillance technology that I was just telling you about, and it feeds mostly on your emotional reaction. What makes you mad? Makes you angry? Makes you want to speak? Makes you mad enough to say, that's hogwash. In all caps.
Same thing mood rage used to do.
Yes, all that kind of stuff. Or it's so funny. You have to share it, even if you don't know if it's true. Because it's so funny. And so you share that kind of stuff. And when you see that happening with it, and people don't even think about that before they share, you see all sorts of stuff being shared, civic or somehow. And the brilliant thing about Mark Zuckerberg, and you can say whatever you want to him, I'll probably agree with 99% of it. But Mark Zuckerberg is brilliant. He realized that who you trust is an important question. And you're most likely to trust people who are your friends than you are anybody else. Now, that means that you like them, you think they have your back, they agree with you, but that doesn't mean that they're expert on all the things that they're talking. You still have to sort of know that kind of stuff. So it's a brilliant marketing. And it gets the news spread out to so many people in such a fast way. It's this huge group, and they're friends. Come on, these are all my friends. They're not gonna steer me wrong. They might. I'm sure they have. And we all have probably fell for some of that kind of stuff. But here's a really important thing I want to tell you is that social media groups. This is made up. This is Facebook. This is YouTube, that's Google. This is Microsoft, Snapchat. I think I can't see these quite well, TikTok. These are just all the major ones. WhatsApp, Facebook, Messenger, Instagram is enormous by comparison to all the other social media platforms. This is Chinese, this is Tencent. This is TikTok is part of it, ByteDance. Alphabet is another part of Google. Well, it is the name for Google. Even if you search for something on Google, you're going to get an answer that's sent back. The real answer to your question may be about 10 different posts from the one that you get, because you're being fed a lot of advertisements. Cheap advertisements, real easy advertisements have to do with your question. And so you have to know how to even look at Google. Sometimes it's the second or third 2, 3, 4 searches at the bottom before you find a site that you really want to find on Google. So knowing how to use these kind of things too. But they really sucked away the advertising. It's not only a brilliant sort of way of spreading information, but it's a brilliant sort of way of getting money out. Because it takes all that advertising away and it puts only the ads out there that people buy. It targets you perfectly. You're interested in those Western boots that kind of have that nice sort of old sheen to them. They look kind of, we call it distressed. And they might be cool that we can send you all sorts of ads for those kind of things. And you've all had the experience, haven't you? Of looking at something and then seeing an ad about that within a day or two, and you wonder, how did that happen? They're watching you. They're feeding you what you've seen to want to know and you'd be interested. And it is the best way to advertise. I know what you want on that. So I can put something in front of you that you might buy and read it. And that's why they're taking away the advertising in such ways they can be targeted and advertised in ways that most broadcast media can't. As, unless they have digital adjuncts. It's a way print can't, unless it has a digital adjunct, so they can sort of watch what you're doing. And even online news organizations are getting into it. They're looking at the clicks, they're looking at the links, they're looking at everything, to find out how they can do a better job of selling them. Facebook, they sucked up so much of the advertising revenue that it's really changed the whole game in terms of how it operates. The changes only give individuals access to more ways for expression. The vastly increase in public's access to information and disinformation. However, they further undermine the old media's business model. That's just upheaval. And you gotta kind of understand that if you're gonna participate in this. This is, I give this lecture to journalists and I give it to people who are consumers of journalism. This is what journalists should know. This is what the public ought to expect from journalists too, and how they do their jobs. So we gotta go up with a new smart. Somebody asked me if I knew who Penny Abernathy, Peabody, I think is her name. And she's a University of North Carolina professor, School of Media Journalism. And they came up with a term about 5 to 6 years ago called news deserts, places where newspapers were disappearing. And they could plot those on the course across the map. Yeah, and since 2004, this came out about 2018, the U.S. had lost more than 1,800 newspapers or dailies, 62 dailies and 1,749 weeklies. So most of those are east of the Mississippi, where you had a lot of small communities, suburban kind of papers. Those are gone. They have disappeared in along the way. We look at Montana. We still have 80 weeklies. We're down to 80. We still have quite a few of them, but there are some of those that are being consolidated, and they always have been. My father-in-law published the Carlson Times Clarion, was the fact that it had 2 newspapers names, and the title told you it was a consolidation of newspapers that could no longer have the people to support both individually. You know, I even think back to the Fort Benton days when we had 2 dailies. Everybody knew at that time that it couldn't last. It couldn't happen. It couldn't last very long. And they would have to consolidate, or somebody would have to buy somebody else. That's going on in great measure right now. During the 50s, 60s, and 70s, were kind of a high golden age of big newspapers. They were corporate entities. They were part of newspaper ownership groups that were on the stock exchange. You know, the leading newspapers incorporated, Gannett was the biggest one, had the great balls of beer. They were these huge companies that not only made money from advertising for their investors, but they also, their stock price was something of value for those investors. When they could sell, they could trade, they could do that kind of stuff. And once you went into that kind of financial relationship with an investor, it's a different thing than from just a subscriber. You have a fiduciary duty to get them to maximize profit. So you are certainly thinking about profit more than you are what readers want. You have to, because that's what stockholders want. What stockholders want is that kind of return. And they couldn't do that with regular sort of advertising. It's getting sucked away. So they're starting to shrink their newspapers. And the best, worst case example that I can think of in Montana is the Great Falls Street. When I first came to this state, it was as close to a statewide daily newspaper as we had in Montana. It was everywhere. This is 1980. It had 40 people in its newsrooms. It had bureaus scattered across the High Line. You could get it in Glendale. You could get it down in the building. You could get it all sorts of other places. The lead papers still kind of held their own kind of territory. Even they paid attention to the Great Falls Tribune thing because it had so many reporters, had the best Capitol bureau, covered the state house, the government just about better than anybody else could have. Crackerjack reporters. One of them just passed away this last year, Chuck Johnson. Maybe you saw about that. But at a time they're wonderful. Now they're down to last time I checked, there were 2 reporters. Yeah. And there may not be more than that today. So there was a paper that's a shell. They sold a beautiful building down on the Missouri River, which I love to go visit. And you look at the Building Gazette's trying to sell this, the Missoulian has already sold its. The Hell Independent has sold its buildings twice. They're trying to find ways they can cut their costs to satisfy the demand share investment in economic markets. That's a sad kind of spiral. And it's something they're rapidly trying to fight by getting their digital enrollment, getting the memberships, getting more people to read them. To do that, they're going to give them something they don't get elsewhere. If they're not hiring reporters, how are they gonna find them? My daily paper is in Missouri. We still get it digitally. But there's, some local news and sometimes it's really good reporting. Some days there's nothing in it. Everything seems like it was from yesterday. It's kind of news, but there's all this advertising, supplement, little information tacked on at the end that really isn't stuff that anybody asks for. And you wonder what happens when communities lose all the information they got about the place. What happens to? Anybody guess what happens to a community when it loses its kind of source of glue that kind of holds different things together? How do you know about each other? How do you know about what's going on, what's being built, what volunteers are working on, what people are doing together in your community? That's a big split. That disintegration is not a good thing. And when communities that lose their newspapers, they lose all sorts of different things. They lose voting participation goes down. There's more polarization because people are looking to polarize national sources for their news and not to the things that they share in common with the people around them. And they're just not participating in their communities as much as they used to. So thank God for places that they're still strong and you still have that community interest going on. It takes so much effort, but it also takes you. I mean, I'm lucky to be talking to you today. I feel like I'm preaching to the choir because most of you are involved somehow or another with making this thing happen. And that's the way community papers really do work best when people are doing it. I remember sitting there, people bringing us obits, people bringing us stories, people bringing us pictures. People bringing me pictures of the most interesting garden vegetable they've ever found. You know, a potato that looked like Winston Churchill. And the only bully thought I ever had in my newspaper days was when I first arrived in Sydney, or when I first was going to edit. They would bring big deer that they would kill, shot at to the back door in the paper and say, come take a picture of this big buck. And I'm busy. I got lots of community events to cover. And this guy wants me to take a picture of this buck. And I'm thinking, there's a lot of these. And once I start taking pictures of those and the big trout and all that other kind of stuff, I'm not gonna have much time to do anything else. My father-in-law always used to love people big fish. And he would say it was, every story, every caption would say it was caught in the vicinity of the 2-dock bridge. Which meant he didn't really know where. They weren't giving the secret away. They wouldn't really know that, but people would look at that kind of stuff too. And I thought, you know, there's a sporting goods place in town. I wonder if they would buy an ad featuring the big buck of the week, the big elk or the biggest fish. And that was the easiest. I'm not an ad guy. I don't know how to sell ads, but that was the easiest sale we ever made. Hermione had an ad. Coast to Coast Hardware had an ad with the big bucks, and people wanted, and they could kind of take some vicarious credit for the hunting. When good hunting and fishing that went on in the area too. But you know, this I don't mean this to be disillusionment. But it means that this is kind of existential for a lot of people. That's kind of the timeline. Whether they're going to be around or not is another story. They may be around in just another way, another guise. But I still think the paper, the tactile paper, is kind of the measure of what's going on in different kinds of papers. Different kind of news organizations. Happen in broadcast television stations, you know, that love TV stations, being combined, bought up, different groups. Ownership traded back and forth. They're in the same game as those newspapers were that were corporately owned. Their first loyalty is to there's not only their investors and not so much the economy community. In that context, you also notice that, and somebody was talking to me about this earlier, what a changing cast of characters there are in those places. The weather people change, the news people change, they're all sort of young in this kind of markets and they move on quickly. Montana's like one of the smallest mass media market, broadcast markets in the country. So when you come here to start, that's what you want to do, start, and you don't want to stay there. Because you gotta keep moving up the ladder if you're gonna make any money at this. And I'm not saying that most journalists I know are money mad. In fact, I can show you example after example of journalists who covered something or watched something or witnessed something that saved their communities hundreds of thousands. You know, the paper in Provo, Utah, just about a year or two ago, when a reporter saw that an insurance settlement that with the city government was about 3 times bigger than you had heard mentioned at a public meeting. So he asked questions and he wrote a story about it. And the company said, oh, that's a mistake. They gave back $300,000. That reporter made about $40,000. What acts did he have? What sort of investment did he have in that story? He didn't get his 25 cents back. I once told a sheriff who wasn't giving me information, I said, I pay your salary. I was young before. I was full of myself. And he said, here's your quarter. But you know, you learn those kind of things at your time, but there are all sorts of places where governments just don't work on enough when somebody's not watching. I could tell when the tenor of a city commission meeting or a county commission meeting changed by just the fact that I walked in and sat down and turned on my TV. Or I opened my machine. Oh, somebody's here, somebody's listening, somebody wants to go. Corruption happens in places where people don't watch. You know, and that's something that newspapers have done for a long time. And that's not liberal, that's not conservative, that's something everybody works about. So watching that kind of stuff is something that only real reporters on the spot can do it. Only the people who hire and check their work can make happen. That's why I think it's so important. Do you live in a news desert? Not too many places in Montana do. Most of these papers didn't have much in the way of reporting that went on. These dark ones are news deserts. I think that's Treasure, Petroleum County, where they have less than about 1 person per square mile. So you know there's not going to be a lot of readership in those kind of areas. They don't have papers, but they rarely have. Golden Valley County. It's now part of the Harlem Times-Clarion. It doesn't have its own newspaper and hasn't had for years. The Billings Outpost is gone. A lot of the weeklies, not a lot of them, some of the weeklies have gone or been consumed by other papers as a result of it. Even so, the Indian papers still exist in the state. And they're having a convention in 2 weeks in Kalispell to celebrate the fact that they're all still here. And to cheer each other on at a time when there's not a lot of cheering going on. But you can see what's happening about news deserts. 1 newspaper, that's a lot. 1 newspaper in areas where they don't have many people, that's still a lot. That's an incredible investment for not having the staff to serve or what you want to. So it just shows you that in rural areas, people care about information, and that makes sense. You're far away from taxes. You don't have that many sources, and you still have a need to know what's going on. But today is so different. We talked about Cronkite. I always throw the slide in. I talk to people from a certain age, let's put it that way, and say, I miss Walter Cronkite. I want my Walter Cronkite. I like having somebody say, and that's the way it is, and I can trust it. A lot of times, but he's never going to exist. And that's the reality. There's no way to get Cronkite on consensus without somebody like Cronkite. And there's no way to get someone like Cronkite in the world with more internet, with an internet. There will be no one that like him just because there will be no more jobs. And nobody will have that kind of influence and power without being looked at. Against all of this is trust in the American mass media. And it's been on trajectory that you can see. I'm not sugarcoating any of this. 1974, 70% trust was pretty high. Where are we now? 28, 34, 38, and this is, better, not very much now. There's been a decline. Some of that, I'm afraid to say, from my own profession, is not our fault. I think that one of the reasons why trust has gone down was that newspaper companies put more stock in what their investors were wanting and meeting their needs and they didn't on their needs. So people thought, well, you saved their money. That guy making $30,000 a year, why pay for the money, but his publisher might have been, his group owner might have been in. So I think that makes people think, well, they're only in for the money. Why should I trust them? What's going on? That doesn't sort of make sense. So I think that went on through much of this time. This is the peak of American newspaper circulation, was still in the 2000s. Trust didn't really take a real huge dip, except after 98, 2000. This is where you see the internet coming. You know, and it's where you see more outlets than you can possibly stand. Some of them kind of shaky in terms of their news judgment. Some of them more punditry, that just means opinions. I teach an ethics class in journalism. And one of the texts we use is by a couple of people who really study journalism, who call it, so there's certain kinds of journalism to use. A journalism of assertion. Assertion is why if I say something forcefully enough, then people will trust me. It's true enough. If I say it forcefully enough, people will trust me. If I assert it to be a fact, it's true. It's not necessarily verified. If I just assert it, then it's a fact, it's true. And I think that's kind of scary too. I don't know how true that is. It has a lot of force, it has a lot of rhetorical power, but is it really true? How do we know that's true? Then there's the journalism of affirmation. Because of the way news platforms, news organizations are set up today, you can choose the news source that fits with the stuff that you like. The way that you think, the way that you look at things. You're not looking at several others, you're looking at one. You still want Walt's program to be there, right? And so you're looking at that one sort of news source. And if you get that, you're not getting an awful lot of variety and much verification to. So that's just the newspaper of affirmation. I just want to get news that tells me what I want to go. This affirms me in my beliefs, my prejudices, whatever the case may be, even my likes, you know, that might be the case. And then the other dissertation is the journalism of aggregation. I don't know if you ever look at Yahoo News or Google News or do news searches online, and you'll see all these sites that have nothing but links to stories. They didn't report, they didn't put together, they didn't verify, they're just aggregating that and was getting together and selling ads around. That's what Google did. Yeah. Yahoo's doing it now. Associated Press used to serve all these states. They lost almost all their, they did away with almost all their news clients to serve just Google and Google and Yahoo and those kind of places because they wanted any bit of news they could possibly. That may be changing. People are seeing that that's kind of a mistake because the only journal that really sort of matters in the scheme of things is the journalism of verification. How do we know? Did they check it out? Did they find out if it's true? Did they have to ask enough information? How far did they try to go? It may take time. It may not fit a split-second news cycle, but you have to find out what's going on, and that could be more difficult. It's the best. I still think it's a good piece of advice is if you're worried about something being true, look at it, see whether it's been verified, and so forth. We were all walking on the plains, prairies of Montana. We had nothing but bear skins on, and it's storming, it's hail coming. And we come up to a cave, and it's kind of dark. We think we got some pretty big bears in this country. They're coming. If they're not here already, you know that there's bears. And so you're thinking about what are we going to do? Get out of the storm. We all run into that cave. Let's send somebody in there to check it out. Now, where we get to vote, or we draft somebody, or we do somebody else, that's another story. But we're gonna get somebody to go in there and look at it. What do we expect from that person? He tells them, truth. And what goes into truth? You gotta be able to see it. You gotta be able to describe it accurately. We don't want it, well, I think it was 10 feet tall, it's 5. We want all that aspects of that witnesses to be totally correct. Somebody who's got a reputation for accuracy and credibility is kind of important before we send somebody in there. We also want somebody who owes his allegiance to us. Okay? Maybe he and the bear are in this together. There's a bear conspiracy theory. And then the bear set it up and get all the people to come in the cave so we can be. So we want somebody who's independent in a sense, who's not just in cahoots with other kind of people. He's independent of faction. And that's what we try to teach journalists to be too. Be an independent observer. When you fall in line, you're accepting things that you haven't checked out. There's a line between where fact kind of ends and faith kind of ends. The journalists can't really deal with that faith part. Not if they're dealing with verification in those kind of cases. And there's nothing wrong with faith. It's everything. It's what we can't explain in fact. We all have some aspects of them in our makeup, but you also have to look at what do we know for sure, how do we know, and how can we prove. So that trust is down. And one of the reasons is there's so many things to deal with things that isn't always good. So much misinformation. Now, misinformation is information that could be wrong for accidental reasons. Could be wrong because somebody was careless. Could be wrong. I remember an editor telling us, and people talk about bias in the news. This is 20 years ago. But he says, I don't think it's always really biased. I think you just have careless or incompetent reporters. And what he said was, he says, they're not really doing their job. They're not checking to see if they don't know enough to know what they don't know. But they don't even know there's 3 sides. In Missoula, there's 12. But they don't know that this is a complicated issue with lots of different ways to kind of look at it, but maybe fact-based too. So they just haven't done their job. It can make them look like they're biased when it's just because they're careless or ignorant. We can take the time to kind of know that. I think there's some, now we have people who are making money and lots of it with disinformation. And that's how I get you to click on something, make you scream and holler, make you laugh and share that information. Even though I know it's not true. Send it out there because it's not true. Because you'll spend a lot of time and I'll get more information about you than I can sell back to other advertisers too. So I have made a lot of money by this. And it comes from nation states, it comes from individuals, it comes from, I don't know what goes into these people's mind. It's pure greed could be, but there's a lot of different reasons why they might take advantage. Scammers have always existed. And now there are new sorts of scams to get you to buy and pay attention to things. And if you're online, you can be just as susceptible as to being scammed by somebody that you might meet. So trust, how are you going to get it back? What are you losing? How are you going to get it back? What do you think about when you think about trust? What do you want? You want somebody who's true. You want somebody who's credible over time. In other words, you don't mind if they make a mistake, well, they don't do it a lot, right? What else do you want? If there's somebody you're going to trust. You want them to show you his or her work? That's called attribution. That's things in parts of sentences. They say it said so and so, or according to this document, or according to those election statistics. That's all transparent information. Anybody can check that and get that, find out if it's true. So that's really important. You want them to be transparent. You want them to tell you where they're getting it. It's like doing the work with your math. Tell me what I'm not. And that's all something that journalists ought to know, and I think the public ought to expect from them too. So that's one thing I think is terribly important. But what else? What else makes you trust somebody in terms of news or factual information?
Who's paying them?
Huh?
Who's paying them?
Who's paying them? It's really important. Who is their loyalty to? If it's not to the readers, but if it's to the advertisers or shareholders, that's a problem. That's all reflected in those trust statistics. There's a time when they didn't believe that, or a lot of people didn't believe that, or it wasn't so much the reporters, it was their bosses they didn't trust. For those kind of reasons. So that's a good question. Who's paying?
Yeah.
Where does their real loyalty lie? Always been a problem. And sometimes it's worse than sometimes than others. What other things do you expect from somebody that you want somebody? I would trust somebody if they have this attribute. What is that attribute?
Reputation.
Reputation, in other words, credibility over time is right, people's reputation.
An affiliation?
Affiliation, are they independent, are they somebody's pet reporter? Are they tied to one faction, they're just gonna parrot everything that their bosses or their news hosts say, is that what they're gonna do, that's how they're going, that's how they can make money and stay in their jobs. But is that what you want from somebody who's seeking trustful information? Probably not. What else would you want?
Are they asking good questions, like hard hitting, like, right,
I wanted to ask you a
uncomfortable
question,
ones?
and lots of them, and that's a tougher thing to do, because people don't answer. And they go, I'm talking, I know lots of journalists are so frustrated today, because they can't get people to talk to them, can't get people to have news conferences, can't get people to respond to information, basic questions that they know they're used. And it's a strategy. If I was a news source, I've got lots of different ways to get my message out. Why do I need to go through that source? It's not authoritative just because it's scarce. You know, I had to have those newspapers in fact. I don't have to have them now. I can just communicate directly with you. I can spew whatever I want. And they're not gonna have any sort of way to check me, but ask me to come with questions. So that's a tougher job than you might think, and reporters are incredibly frustrated today. People won't talk to them or answer questions. There's a lot more of that, and it's both sides. It's liberals and progressives and conservatives, and all sides are worried about that. I'm gonna ask you one more aspect of trust.
Admit when they've made a mistake.
That's it. That's it. Without that. How do you deal with that when somebody says, well, I'm supposedly authoritative source says I got it wrong? How do you respond to it? How do you want them to make that apology to you?
Lay out the facts, take the emotion out of it.
Show my word, show me how I misled, you know, bad facts from the county treasurer's office. And you do this, or I misinterpreted the facts in the county attorney's office, or whatever the case may be. If they're willing to admit their kind of mistake and say how they did it and why it happened, that's so much better than. What happens to them when they do it then? Well, that comes back to their reputation over time. If it's something that's a rare thing, I might cut them some slack. If they're new at this, and they show the appropriate level of remorse, I might give them another shot as long as they're going to write the correction and give the kind of apology. And that's why I say it's really important how you apologize. I remember when you were little, I'm sorry. Oh, don't cut it. Now, nobody's going to cut you that kind of slack. They don't want to know. What did you do? You know how you made a mistake so that we can be fairly sure that you won't repeat it. And every time I know his name, I made mistakes. I got people's names. Don't spell grandma's name, misspell grandma's name, and I moved it. And piece of advice. The only thing I want to do is don't do that. Okay, it'll haunt you for the rest of your life. I can still remember the names of people's names. And it hurts, it stings. If it doesn't sting, I'm worried about you. As a journalist, it should be something that you think about. So it's all in how you reflect after that, and how you proceed and how you go over time. I know a weekly editor in this state, the head reporter who was making up quotes. All sources, Users came quote, they couldn't be reached, they didn't want to talk, so the reporter made up the quotes. It's still fully very young, didn't have much training in German, hadn't any practice, and, you know, we just thought I was okay with it.
What?
I don't know that you have to go to journalism still to know that, that's problem. You know, I mean, that's something, and, and she called all these editors, all across the country, she called me, said, what should you do? And I said, fine. I don't know what I'm gonna do for you. One of my favorite times to the state. She gave him a chance. But she made him write an apology and go to the regiment, telling people what he did wrong and why he did it wrong, and writing people letters and saying, here's what I did, you know, and he had to go through training and all this other kind of stuff. And she said, you do all that, I'll keep going until I see different. Now, she has so much trust for the people of her community, where she didn't make mistakes. She was noted to be just a great verification that people agreed with her. And they were saying, I'm glad you did that. I'm glad you gave that kid a second chance, which is foreign to my situation. I don't believe, you know, how they could have given this kid a second chance. But the kid's taking classes, he's doing reading basic primary journalism. I would never quote somebody anonymously. You know, we'll see. The proof will be in the time, the judgment. But that also, they're just telling me that there's an area that really has the faith of both. And that's kind of amazing to me when you think about it. The cost of local news, media problems with media coverage, we never know what we don't know. Corruption, employers, taxes can rise, public officials can indulge their worst impulses. And nobody's watching that, but we're gonna make it certainly do those times. Margaret Sullivan was our media critic for the Washington Post for a lot of years. She's still around. Types of media ownership, there is a publicly owned media corporation, so I can trade stock. They have value, they're owned by stockholders, they also have subscribers, but really the big fiduciary relationship is the stockholders. Privately owned media corporations. That means they're not selling their stock, but they have a lot of shareholders that they need pretty important. So you gotta kind of know how they work and just understand them. Individual ownership, Jeff Bezos, the Washington Post, you know, private ownership in LA Times. You got a big sugar daddy who can afford to lose lots of money. Right now, the Washington Post owner is saying, I can't afford to lose this kind. And so his editor quit, and he's laying off people. And Elon Musk is laying off people like Twitter like crazy. Hedge funds, these are groups that invest in newspapers because just they want to own that stock, because they're gonna make money off of one way or the other. If that company goes belly up, I can sell off the land and buildings and subsidiary deposit interest, and so I'm gonna make profit. If it makes money, you're gonna do fine. But if it doesn't, I'm gonna find a way to do that. And those are called vulture capitalist firms. And nonprofits, those are organizations that all sink all their money right back into the newspaper. And they were fairly rare 10, 20 years ago. And now they're starting to make a big company. You can see what the preference is for different publications, print publications compared with digital devices, but then most print devices are also digital devices, so it's hard to really sort of draw hard lines between that kind of stuff. But here's some of the landscape in Montana journalism. Anybody know what the Daily Montana is? Anybody see the Daily Montana? Are they corporate owned? No. They're a 501c3 company. And if you know what that means, it means I'm tax free. But I can't editorialize, I can't endorse candidates, but I can cover anything I want to. I can even sell ads to some extent. But all the money we make has to go back into the corporation because it's a public good. We're going to give these are the good do-gooder tax breaks. And we give lots of, every nonprofit you know of that's a 501c3 has to operate by the same rules we did in Montana, there's no difference. But it allows them to keep more of the money so they can reinvest in more advertising, people, more reporters, more people like that. And unfortunately, these are all digital. It's expensive to have press. Expensive to pay that kind of cost. It's almost all of it. Anybody know the Montana Free Press?
But that's not really press. At least one of our candidates recently said that.
It is not, it is press.
Of course it is, it's in its name.
Well, press is kind of a strange word, because these are all digital.
Yeah.
They don't have a press, if you want to be accurate, so maybe they want to call themselves something else. It's an old newspaper name in Montana, and they kind of cooperative with what they do, but they're a 501c3. You can go to their page and somebody said, I want to know who's paying. You go to their about section on their page, and it shows you every donation they've got from corporations and funders for the past year. And every single individual donor that they've had who bought a prescription from them. My name is on that because my name is on a lot of lists. I donate to a lot of people because I like news and I like to bet on good news organizations. Yeah.
There's one funding source that you haven't really covered is subscription.
Well,
Platforms have really
Yeah.
become a lot more popular on.
These are also subscription platforms.
Well,
And it's kind of what they have to do. Remember, in the old days, everybody was subscription platforms at the beginning, and they needed it to sell ads, so they could attract advertising. Now you need to sell, have a lot of subscribers, so you can track.
I mean, there are like commercial, privately owned platforms that make their money with subscriptions rather than selling advertising.
That's true. That's true. And, trying to think of one, I think one in Montana rocket line, but I think,
Yeah,
but that is particularly true. And if you can do that, fine, it's called memberships. But even the corporate guys are doing that. They're selling them, you're not
but they're also
subscribing to them.
subsidized advertising.
Yeah,
But the Breaking Points platform,
Yeah.
which is a national.
yeah, so,
You know,
but
it's-
what I'm trying to say is that when you sell memberships, you get that base, then you can get other funders to join you. And for a lot of these guys, they also have memberships and the sustainers, I think is the word. Public television is the poster child, we've been doing it for years, public television, public radio, they're not owned by stockholders, they're owned by donors essentially. And they have fundraisers like you won't believe. And you kind of want to say, stop, I'll give you $1,000 if you stop this fundraiser. So they're still there. They do get some public money. Montana PBS is housed, public radio is housed on my campus. The university donates office space and resources for them to do that. Public radio, public television, originally started out at something for universities to run and operate, and that hasn't changed. So you still have that on Montana PBS stations, Yellowstone Public Radio, Montana PBS in Bozeman and Missoula. They both get some percentage of their money from government, but it's a small percentage compared to mostly what they got is foundation funders, and also what they got is individual donors. In Missoula, on their fundraising last night, they say, all right, we're gonna have cats versus dogs. If you want to give us a donation in the honor of your cat, send it in. If you want to see it in the honor of your dog, send it in. We'll see if cats beat dogs and people beat dogs. It's kind of amazing to see that kind of happen, but it's still very local. It's very community kind of involved. And the people in the station are very actively involved in getting these memberships to come and join them. And they give them everything back. These guys do entertainment as well as news, advice shows and stuff like this. ProPublica, nonprofit investigative outfit, investigative journalism is the most expensive. But it takes a lot of time to do that kind of work. So they have lots of subscribers, they have lots of foundation and funds. And what you want to do is get so many diverse kind of sources for funding that nobody can call the shots. That's the secret to ProPublica. We started out with the Wall Street Journal, and then there's still Wall Street now. Look out Santa Cruz, it's one of my heroes right now. So it's a newspaper that's trying to be for profit. And it's also trying to see if it can switch a little bit to nonprofit status here pretty soon too. We figure they're having a hard time to sort of make it in full profit, but they just won these two at the bottom, just won Pulitzer Prizes this year, the top awards and titles. And this one is a local community newspaper for Santa Cruz, California, which is bigger than any community you could probably find in the market. Here's a public radio station revenues, where they come from, individuals, corporations, these are foundations. Federal appropriate, foundations, federal appropriation. I'm colorblind, is that color? I think it is. And federal, state, and local governments is the smallest percentages and some investments there too. Local news still matters more than ever. And at a time when it's kind of a disadvantage in terms of finding information, but in Montana, they're still strong, they're still robust, and I'd like it to stay that way. I know you would too. And it has to start staying that way. It's where people gather, it's where they have common ground. You're more likely to meet over a volunteer meeting, over to build a new, a new teaching in Hollywood, so that they can get some teachers to come there and working on a park with, some youth project that you work together. That's the future. You all can kind of agree to do those things. This library is an example of that kind of community work that goes on that really does link people together in areas where they're not always fighting about things. And that's something I think is kind of important. We have more in common than we've been and divides us. But people like to look at the stuff that divides us. It's a good way to divide you even further. So that you're not thinking about a lot of those things. So we talked about how local reporters can make a difference by just being in the room. And I tell you what, I've seen that, I bet you have too, by knowing, I had people, city council members, I've had county commissioners, I've had legislators say, Dennis, what did we do about this last week?
Yeah.
That scares me a lot. Because they're not watching, themselves as much as they think they're, or it should be flattering. Because they think, they trust what I'm doing. But that scares me to do something. Okay, this is why you see it all the time. Local government reviews back and about land killed and money fine explosion. This paper, this issue was chock full of community, removed the bullets community. Got that right. And it took an incredible amount of work. This next issue took even more amount of work to put it together on such short notice. But it's I don't want to diminish the role of the editors and people who sell those advertisements and do all these stories because I know it's a lifestyle. I come from that people. I have family members who live that life for 50 years and local newspapers, but it's also the community that makes this thing happen all the time. So I would say, get on. It's the most important thing you can do for a community, for the way things are going forward, for public information to get out. And it's not just the newspaper, it's government, it's the local fire department, it's civic institutions that are part of this. And they know that they're going to give you stuff, they're going to be able to back it up. If they, other groups, nonprofits and services, community groups, get this kind of support in the community, they know that it means a lot. So that's my spiel today. Local news matters more than ever. Like I said, a time where it's under great stress, probably not so much in Montana as elsewhere. I mean, the second oldest people in the state's looking pretty robust to me. But it feels like an existential thing every week. How we're gonna get this thing done. So thanks to all of you who support it. I have a feeling a lot of you do. And that's why, and it shows.
Yeah.
We went through who do you trust? Skepticism is smart thing. These are all the questions. how to check some facts. If you want some of this, I'll give it to you, but these are some good sources and you're not really sure, go looking for things. This one's for kids, it's on Instagram. This is fact checking .org, this is PolitiFact, this is Snopes for kind of cultural stuff, like things on TV and entertainment, you don't know if they're true or they're not. It helps you to know this kind of stuff. And I'll leave you this one. The primary purpose of journalism is to provide citizens with the information they need to be free and self-governed. Yeah. I think that's it. That's the time. Look at your front page.
No.
That's what happened this year. Even I'm pretty sure that's what happened this year. Because the people made sure to So, with that, I'll say thank you very much. I have talked almost all the time. If you have questions for me, I'd be glad to stay around and answer them. If you have a quick one that I can handle, John, I'd be glad to.
When you were talking about